morning, and welcome to First Edition, the online ministry of First Community Church. My name is Glenn Miles. I'm the senior minister in this amazing congregation, and we are thrilled that you have joined us on this day for worship. We want you to know, here at First Community, no matter who you are, where you're from, where you may be going, you are welcomed and accepted in this place as you are. Right now, there's a QR code on your screen. Take a moment, would you please, and use the camera option on your phone to capture that code. A link will pop up. Click on that link, and it'll take you to our website where you can register your attendance, you can offer a prayer concern, you can even make a gift to the offering if you choose to do so. We would love to hear from you on this day. Today, I begin a new sermon series titled Measuring What Matters. It's connected to our 2025 giving campaign, the campaign where we ask our congregation to turn in their estimates of giving for next year so that our business office can plan the budget and our ministry folks can plan the ministries and mission opportunities that are coming up in the year ahead. The text comes from Matthew. It's a teaching from Jesus to his disciples and ultimately to us. The sermon is titled Imagine. Imagine what it would be like for us to be compassionate in everything we do. That's what Jesus is teaching his disciples, to walk alongside with people in their grief, in their sorrow, in their sadness, their worry, their fear, and all the rest. It's a word that was appropriate 2,000 years ago and one that speaks to us today. I'm super glad that you've joined us for worship. Let's now worship together. On each of these Sundays in this giving campaign this year, we will present videos to you featuring members of the church, members of our staff, and others who will share with you and tell basically the story of our church. This is part one in the story of First Community Church, our community of faith.
We've started offering Donna's Donuts on certain Sunday mornings during the year. We always do it during the summer months, and it's a way to reach out to our community and let them know that we're here in Grandview and everyone is welcome here. It's a great time in Grandview because people are out walking their dogs or they're out on their daily run, and we can stop and say hello and treat them to a donut and give them a taste of what we're all about too.
I am Madison Leibrock, a member of First Community Church.
I'm Seth Miller, also a member of First Community Church. Madison and I came to a Christmas Day service, and we actually sat all the way in the back at the top of the balcony and really enjoyed what Glenn Miles had to say and really felt moved. So we decided it was something we wanted to continue doing. And so I ended up requesting Sundays off of work and started coming regularly. We slowly moved forward, and now we sit in the front and try to attend every Sunday.
I remember coming to First Community and looking for the Wi-Fi password, and it was a place for all. And I thought that was really cool. And I think that's really important in today's world where there's so much commotion and conflict and drama, to know that there is a big tent that everyone can get in and be a part of.
The gathering here at First Community was really what brought me in. We attended just not knowing anyone, and it was our first, other than Sunday, church event that we went to. We sat down all by ourselves at a table all alone, and we're just a little bit terrified, and we're just ready for whatever came. And some sweet souls named Jen and Joanna just came up and were speaking to us like they already knew us. And I honestly was like, Seth, I think they're mistaking us for someone else, because we do not know these people, and they're being so sweet and so welcoming. And that just really pulled us in. And since then, we've been continuing to go to the gathering and just building a little family there.
There have been many new members who found their way into our church through the gathering. It became a great way for them to meet new folks, but also learn about our faith and our theology and our history and who we are. And it's really been an enjoyable way to create an opportunity for longtime members and brand new folks who are just now discovering the church.
When people join the church, it's not a business transaction. It's a conscious decision to enter into a relationship. And with every successful and fulfilling relationship, it's an act of generosity, continuous generosity on both sides. It's saying, you know what? You matter to me. And because you matter to me, I am going to give of myself to you. I'm going to give my love and my time and my attention, and I'm going to show up for you time and time again. We strive to provide meaningful worship and education and opportunities to serve and fulfilling relationships and guidance so that you can be the person that God intended you to be.
Imagine a church whose mission and ministry is guided by compassion. Imagine a church that allows compassion to be the guiding force for all that it does. A church that walks alongside people in their pain, in their sorrow. A church that is there in moments of sadness and deep grief. Imagine a church that puts compassion at the center of everything they do. When Jesus looked out at the crowds in the moment we just heard, he looks at them with compassion. They are harassed and helpless. They are living in a brutal time, in a brutal era. Imagine what it was like to be in Palestine 2,000 years ago under Roman rule. The Romans, for all the great things they did in terms of organizing their government and doing a variety of other things, were brutal when it came to being in control. If you got in the way of a Roman legion, they would just as soon kill you before they bothered to ask you to move. If you did anything that Rome thought was going to be harmful for them, they would go ahead and execute you. We tend to think of the crucifixion as a one-time event. It's likely that during Roman rule in Jesus' day, crucifixions happened every day, sometimes dozens, sometimes some reports even hundreds. Were put to a cross as a sign and a symbol of what happens if you get in the way of Rome. The people are overwhelmed. They're harassed. They're helpless. They live in a brutal age. They need a word of hope. They need a faith that is based on love and joy and grace, something to get them through the day, something to give them hope in the future. Jesus says to his disciples, and maybe the crowd could hear him as well, he says to his disciples, they were like sheep without a shepherd. The disciples would hear an echo in that phrase of something similar that comes up in the Old Testament all the time, especially in the 8th century prophets, about 700 years before the time of Jesus. Jeremiah and Isaiah and others would say, oh, our people are like a sheep without a shepherd. There was turmoil within the government. There was turmoil on the outside. There were various countries lining up to attack Jerusalem, lining up to attack the people. And at the same time, they were divided inside. They were no longer the people that God had called them to be when God called them out of the wilderness. They were sheep without a shepherd. Jesus sees them in this way, and it fills him with compassion for them. I also think that Jesus is wanting to invoke a little bit of a psalm that maybe you thought of when I quoted that sheep without a shepherd. Did you think of Psalm 23? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And then we preachers sometimes look at a text that's used all the time, like Psalm 23, as a bit of a cliche. We think of it that way until we don't. I remember reading it at my grandfather's funeral service 25 years ago or so, barely able to finish the last line, and thinking how much love I had for my grandpa. I remember on the Sunday after 9/11, using Psalm 23 as the text for my sermon. Do you remember how helpless and harassed we felt on 9/11? Atlanta I was in Atlanta at the time. It wasn't attacked like New York City or Washington, D.C., but there were rumors swirling all around that at least 2 of the terrorists might have actually trained at an airport near Atlanta. Turned out a couple of weeks later to be true. We felt like we were in the valley of the shadow of death. We felt helpless, overwhelmed, worried. Jesus also looks at the crowd and says to his disciples, the field is ripe unto the harvest. I know that's a little different from how you heard it read a moment ago, but I memorized this text in the old King James when I was a little boy. It still comes out that way. The field is white unto the harvest. That means the harvest is ready to be gathered in. But the laborers are few, Jesus says. It's interesting that he combines these 2 pictures, 2 different ways of seeing things. There's the good shepherd and there's the harvest that is ready to be harvested. But what Jesus is saying is the people need a word. They need a good shepherd. They need direction. They need advice. They need love. They need compassion. And at the same time, they're ready for this word to be spoken. They're ready for you, disciples, to go out among the crowd, to go out among the countryside, the towns and villages and hamlets, and wherever you find yourself, and bring this word of hope, bring this word of grace, bring this word of faith, because the people are ready. The harvest is ready. The time is now. They need a good shepherd. It's a beautiful text. It's a lovely reminder that God wants to bring God's love to the world. God wants to bring God's love to us. Even now, Christ's love can be made real when we receive it, accept it, and let it flow through us out and beyond us. Christ is also doing something else here. Jesus is also implying something that I think is quite clear. The field is ready, but the laborers are few. In other words, we don't have all the assets that we need, but they already exist. They're already there. It's going to take time. It's going to take talent. It's going to take a tithe. It's going to take all of these things in order for this message to get out into the world, to get out in Jesus' day in Palestine, in our day, out into the world. It's going to take time and talent and tithe. It's going to take our efforts. We have the assets there. But the problem is, too much of our world, too much of our current culture sees things through a lens of scarcity. There's never enough, never enough, never enough. Be careful, be careful, be careful. Hold on tight. Instead of seeing the world through a lens of abundance, where there's more than enough. This is not an easy lesson to learn. It wasn't easy for me, trust me. I'm remembering a time when I was in Atlanta again, and we'd had a couple of good years of income in our pledge drives and our giving drives and campaigns. And then a couple of flat years where the giving kind of went flat. And so the leadership of the church said, let's bring in a stewardship company and a consultant to help us examine who we are and how we might strengthen the giving life of our church. The consultant that we hired was perfect. He was this good old boy from Alabama. His voice sounded like butter melting. He just had that sound and that feel about him. He was a retired old Baptist preacher, but an old Baptist from back in the day before the fundamentalists took over the Baptist church in the 80s. He was well educated, well trained, just an amazing man. In fact, one of the church leaders said, we're really glad we've hired this slow-talking Southerner that we can understand to counter the fast-talking preacher from California that we hired. I wasn't too offended because they were right. We made a great team. He worked with the leadership of the church, with a variety of lay folks in the congregation, asked the lay leaders to, as the program staff did this week, to make their estimates of giving in advance. They came in all great. We were very pleased with those. And then I got a call from him on the Wednesday before we were starting the giving campaign. He said, "Glenn, we need to talk." He had the same tone as my wife. I thought, uh-oh, this is not going to go well. Came in to see me a couple hours later, sat down in my office, and he said, "The leadership gifts are great. They've done really well. I think almost all of them have increased, those who were able to. But there's one that's lacking, and it's yours." I said, I don't understand. We're doing as well as we can. I mean, you need to look at our life right now. We have 2 little boys. We're saving for college. We just bought a house for the first time 5 years ago. We've got a mortgage for the first time ever, all these expenses. My wife works full time. I work full time. We're doing all we can. This is the best we can do. And he said, "No, I don't agree. You have more capacity. As the leader of the church, you need to set the tone. You need to tell them how much. But they need to be confident, and you need to be confident that you're doing as much as you possibly can." I drove home a couple hours later, sat down with Julie after dinner was over, and the boys were playing in the backyard. I told her about the conversation, and I was really ready for her to say to me, "Oh, we just can't do that. There's no way. We can't afford that. That's too much. You can't do it." She said, "No, he's right. We can do more." How much did he say? He said, "Increase it by 2 or 3 times as much." She said, "We can do 4 times." She said, "In order for you to be the pastor that church needs, you need to make the commitment. We need to make a commitment to do everything we possibly can, because the world needs the message of that church. What was true in Atlanta has been true for my life in Kansas City, and even more so in this congregation. The world needs our voice. They need our voice of compassion. They need our voice of welcome. They need our voice of inclusion. In a world that seems to be filled with angry and divisive voices, and racism that seems to be coming up strong again, and homophobia seems to be coming up strong again, and xenophobia is coming up strong again. We need this voice to be spread out, not just to your homes and neighborhoods, but to our community and our culture, maybe even the world. I believe in this church. I believe in the message this church has had for over a century. Being willing to go out into the streets with the good news of God's welcome and acceptance for all. The time is now. As these ugly voices seem to get stronger and stronger, it's time for us, not out of anger, not out of frustration, but out of compassion, to bring this word to the world. Now, a moment of clarity here. Sometimes folks get confused when we talk about our open, welcoming, and accepting presence, that we welcome and accept everyone. Sometimes folks think that means we have to give a voice to messages that are counter to what we hear from Jesus. Here's an example. When I was in Kansas City, I preached a sermon on the church being more welcoming and accepting, and inviting the whole world to come to us, to be a part of our community of faith. There was an old retired preacher in that church who met me afterwards when everyone else had gone through the narthex and had some coffee and shaken my hand, etc. He said, "I want to talk to you for just a couple of moments. Can I?" I said, "Sure." He said, "You don't believe what you preached? You don't believe that literally?" I said, "No, I do." He said, "No, you don't. What if the Westboro Baptist Church showed up? Would you invite them in?" Do you know who the Westboro Baptist Church is? It's a church that's built on ugliness and hatred. In fact, this congregation, I think at 1320 Cambridge Boulevard about 25 years ago, was picketed by the Westboro Church, which is a good sign for our church if those folks picket us. I said, of course they would be welcome. He said, "You can't mean that. You would welcome that message of hatred, their racism, their homophobia? Oh, no, 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 no. I would welcome them as humans. I would welcome them as children of God. If that message tried to be spread by them, I'd ask them to stop. If they wouldn't stop, the leadership of the church would invite them to leave. As human beings, Everyone is welcome. That doesn't mean the messages that are counter to what Jesus teaches can be a part of it. Imagine a church where compassion guides everything we do. It's a beautiful thing to see when it happens. Again, another story from Atlanta. I remember meeting a woman after the 11 o'clock service who asked me if she could speak to me. Once most of the folks had left, I said, sure. We had a cup of coffee together in the narthex of that church, and she told me her story. She said, about 7 weeks ago, I was driving around your sign here, and I saw that the church had a message on it. It said, grace spoken here. And I started to cry, she said, because I need grace in my life. And so I've been coming now for several weeks. May I tell you my story? I said, yes, please do. She said her parents immigrated from China before she was born to San Francisco. Her parents became American citizens, and then she was born in San Francisco. She met a man online. This is the early days of the internet. She met a man online, but they connected right away, and they decided after 2 months that they would meet in person. So she got on a plane and flew to Atlanta. She said to me, he was everything I was looking for in a spouse. He was handsome, charming, fun, looked like he was doing well in his work, in his career. And 2 months after that, I know it sounds fast, but I was crazy about the guy. I thought he was crazy about me, and we got married. And a few weeks later, he pushed me up against a wall, angry about something I'd said. Not long after that, the slaps began. And then finally he punched me in the face one day and bloodied me. And I knew I had to get out. Luckily, I'd made some friends. They helped me move out of the house. They got me to safety. The marriage is over. But then with tears in her eyes, she said, but I still feel this sense of guilt. That's a common thing for victims of abuse. That somehow I'm the one who's wrong. Somehow I'm the cause of his violence and his anger. Somehow I'm the one. And when I saw that sign, grace spoken here, I knew I needed grace. I needed a new beginning. And she said, Pastor Glenn, I've loved learning about Jesus. I'm a Buddhist. My parents brought their Buddhism with them from China. I've spent my children, teen, and adult years studying the teachings of Buddha, but I'm loving everything I'm hearing about Jesus, and he sounds like the Buddha quite often, and I want to know, can I join your church and still be a Buddhist? I said, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, we might learn from you about Buddhism. Bring your full self, bring who you are. You see how amazing it is when we can walk by someone in their pain, to walk with someone rather in their pain, to be with them in their time of sorrow, to stand together united with them. Why? Because this world is full of so many people. Some of them are just beat up by words, but that can be painful as well. This world is desperate for the message we bring, for the hope of Jesus, for the love of Christ. In fact, if you were to ask me, what do I think the purpose of worship is? I would say one of the primary things is to receive the love of Christ and take that same love of Christ to our homes, our neighborhoods, the community, and the culture. It's the love of Christ that brings us here. It's the love of Christ that sends us back out into the world. I know it can be a frightening time. I know our culture feels divided. It feels like we're on the edge of violence, but it is a great time to be the church. You might be surprised to hear me say that, but it is a great time to be the church. I read a sermon last week by an African-American pastor named the Reverend Dr. Patrick Keene, K-E-E-N, Patrick Keene, give a brilliant sermon to his church. And he said those words to him. I'm quoting him. It's a great time to be the church. But sadly, the church hasn't always stood up in times like this. The church hasn't always been willing to add its voice of compassion and hope and grace to the world. And he quoted back in the 1960s when so many churches, progressive white churches like First Community, not us, but lots of others that are out there that refused to stand together with Martin Luther King. They would say to him literally, Martin, we're not quite ready. If you could just wait, you could just hold off. We're not quite ready. Slow down. Take your time. And remember what King's response was. If not now, when? If not today, what day? Patrick Keene's right, though. It's a great time to be the church again. Why? Because those voices of racism and homophobia still exist, surprisingly. I was shocked when I got to Atlanta, and after being there a month, this longtime member of the church, a former leader in the church, took me to lunch after I'd quoted Martin Luther King in a sermon, and he said, you know, some of us back then and still today think he should have just shut up and gone home. 9 years later, I went to the church in Kansas City, a good church like this one. I quoted Martin Luther King on my first Sunday. It was Martin Luther King's birthday weekend. I quoted him on my first Sunday in January in 2003. 2 people met me at the door and said, leave King out of the sanctuary. We're tired of that voice. Fast forward to today, and we're still hearing those voices that want to divide us, those voices that want to separate us, those voices that look down at the other as though somehow they're less than, as Molly Hagel's children's moment was so clear. It's a great day to be the church because the world needs what we bring. They need the love of Christ. They need this word. They need this word now and tomorrow and the next day and beyond. Jesus is saying to his disciples, Jesus is saying to us, we have the assets. We have the time and the talent and the tithe. We've got enough, more than enough. The field is ripe unto the harvest, but the laborers are few. Jesus is challenging us, you and me, to stand up, step up, and do what we can in the name of Christ's love, because it's a great day to be the church. Amen.